America's vanished estates, opulent Gilded Age retreats that were dynamited, incinerated, or simply forsaken. Picture this. Rising along the cliffs above the Hudson beside the coasts of Newport and tucked away in serene woodlands, there rose genuine stone fortresses, boasting over 100 chambers, marble balustrades, corridors accented in gold, intimate playhouses, and heated conservatories. These were the domains of the nation's wealthiest tycoons. Yet nowadays, scarcely anyone recalls that nearly all of them vanished without a trace. Certain estates were obliterated by dynamite blasts. Others succumbed to blazes so immense they lit up the horizon for miles around. A few were merely deserted, their grand pianos, artworks, and glittering fixtures abandoned to molder under relentless downpours. The stated explanations seem straightforward. Burdensome taxes, prohibitive upkeep costs, encroaching roadways. But each of these grand edifices hides an odd tale: nocturnal detonations, enigmatic blazes dismissed as mishaps, abrupt choices to raise architectural gems to their very footings. What drove America to dismantle its own chateaus? Was it purely financial, or was there a deliberate effort to wipe away the remnants of an era defined by staggering fortunes? Chapter 1. The Demolition of an American Versailles. A chilly, overcast dawn breaks in spring 1980 at Whitemarsh Hall, just beyond Philadelphia. Spectators assemble behind a chain-link barrier, hushed in anticipation. Some clutch cameras at the ready, while others gaze intently. They're witnessing the demise of a structure that once appeared indestructible. The edifice before them is colossal, more than 100 rooms, walls of French limestone, intricate stone carvings that demanded years from skilled artisans. Details reminiscent of continental monarchies, proportions evoking sovereign splendor, though this isn't Europe, nor a seat of kingship. It was once a personal residence. Now it's destined for obliteration. The wrecking team operates with expert efficiency, placing charges at critical supports. The mansion has lain vacant for years, panes broken, rooftop caving and ragged. Still, its framework endures with formidable strength. Stone yields only grudgingly. A cue is given. The explosives erupt in a split second. The whole seems to pause. Then gravity asserts itself. Facades crumple. The ceiling collapses downward. A dense, billowing haze erupts skyward, momentarily eclipsing the daylight. As it dissipates, the view resembles a battlefield. Debris, shards, meticulously hewn, and positioned stones now strewn haphazardly over soil soon to be leveled smooth. One onlooker, a woman, dabs at her tears. The man next to her shakes his head in disbelief. Nearby, a group of kids on bikes observes casually, unaware of the significance. To them, it's merely an aged pile being torn apart. They can't comprehend the legacy. They lack knowledge of the construction expenses. They haven't heard of the lavish soirees, the celebrity visitors, the live ensembles, the landscapes crafted by designers who served royalty too. In mere weeks, the wreckage will be carted off. The property will be prepped. Tract homes will emerge. Tidy yards, paved paths, hoops for hoops, the everyday rhythm of suburban existence. And Whitemarsh Hall will fade into oblivion. Not a spectral haunt that clanks about or drifts through corridors. Rather, one that evaporates entirely, leaving scant evidence beyond archived images and the dim recollections of those who once strolled by its barriers, pondering the luxuries within. This narrative traces that fate, not just for the Whitemarsh Hall, but for scores of similar abodes. Palaces so magnificent, they outshone Europe's finest. Erected by dynasties whose surnames embodied U.S. manufacturing prowess, conceived by elite designers wealth could command. Laden with masterpieces, scarce volumes, overseas furnishings, and all the trappings affluence could summon, only to dissolve sequentially. Some met deliberate wrecking, Others perished in infernos whose origins remained murky. A handful were neglected outright, decaying until authorities deemed them unsafe and machines sealed their end. The pragmatic accounts rang true. Maintenance proved unaffordable, sizes ill-suited to contemporary needs, plots too prized for one dwelling alone. Yet, the magnitude of these losses provokes deeper inquiries. Why would America, which in principle honors heritage safeguarding, permit the erasure of so many of its stateliest homes? Why would the very lineages that poured riches into their creation allow such decay? And in instances, why did the ruin proceed with such haste? It bordered on the premeditated. To grasp the downfall of these dwellings, one must first comprehend the society that conceived them. The Gilded Age, epoch of rail lines and ironworks, when one cohort amassed riches unprecedented in American annals. A period where erecting a citadel felt not extravagant but emblematic of triumph. Yet to fully appreciate their loss, consider what followed that glittering time. Then came new taxes, 2 world wars, evolving societal norms, the growth of suburban living, and the point when maintaining a sprawling 100-room estate simply stopped being practical. This narrative traces that ascent and eventual decline. Chapter 2. The drive behind constructing palaces, the mindset of the Gilded Age. These grand residences didn't emerge out of nowhere. They represented the tangible outcome of distinct economic pressures that converged in the years following the Civil War, channeling riches into a handful of individuals at an unprecedented pace. From 1865 to 1900, U.S. industry underwent a profound transformation. Railroads connected the vast continent, steel output expanded repeatedly, telegraph wires united urban centers that once seemed worlds apart. Financial systems advanced to the point where funds could cross state borders in mere hours rather than weeks. Wealth accumulated at a velocity few could have foreseen. Someone beginning with a modest iron workshop might in just 2 decades dominate steel manufacturing across half the East Coast. A financier supporting a single rail route could soon underwrite scores of them. A trader dealing in imported textiles might evolve that venture into a vast retail network. The velocity was crucial. These weren't established dynasties with hereditary privileges and ages-old properties. These were individuals who viewed themselves as bootstrapped successes, or at least, that's the tale they spun. The truth was more complicated, yet the narrative persisted. I rose from obscurity. And if you truly believed you'd forged a dominion out of thin air, a fortress was essential to prove its authenticity to everyone. The old world archetype loomed large. Immense wealth required ostentatious presentation, not merely for pride, though self-importance certainly played a role. Such displays served as vital social scaffolding. They signaled your position. They drew influential figures into your circle. They facilitated partnerships, commercial ventures, and unions. A fellow with a simple brownstone might possess riches, but one with a 60-room estate and manicured grounds unmistakably wielded power. Thus, they erected not utilitarian dwellings, nor even particularly cozy ones by today's measures. They crafted bold statements in granite and marble. Picture the reasoning. You're a rail magnate. Your competitor has unveiled a 30-room home, complete with a grand ballroom. Opt for 20 rooms, and you appear diminished. Erect 40 rooms plus dual ballrooms, and you project supremacy. The math is stark and straightforward. Greater room count, broader grounds, flashier opulence, elevated prestige. And prestige carried weight that's simple to overlook today. This was a dynamic society in flux. Legacy. East Coast lineages retained cultural sway, but their economic clout was waning. Fresh, industrial titans had the cash, yet craved validation. An imposing residence offered a fast track to acceptance. It conveyed, wordlessly, I merit a seat at the elite's table. These properties also offered straightforward functional benefits. They acted as venues. No one could entertain 50 key figures in a cramped city row house. Space was required, expansive layouts tailored for gatherings with flow and sound dynamics premeditated, plus personnel to manage catering, illumination, entertainment, and arrivals. The estate transcended mere shelter. It operated as an apparatus for generating and sustaining sway. The rivalry unfolded openly. Along New York's Fifth Avenue, opulent homes stood like an array of sculpted prizes in stone, each vying to eclipse its neighbor. One clan floored entire corridors in marble from Italy. The subsequent one shipped complete room sets from French castles. Another engaged Tiffany to produce bespoke stained glass that transformed daylight into a personal spectacle. On the North Shore of Long Island, eventually dubbed the Gold Coast, the trend amplified across grander expanses. Space allowed for expansion. Properties stretched over scores of acres. Certain ones included private farms, generating stations, and even dedicated firefighting units. Dwellings perched on elevated ridges or overlooked the sea. Pathways were orchestrated deliberately. Winding entrance roads, imposing entrances, and landscaped views ensured every guest's approach evoked stepping into an alternate realm. Newport adhered to its distinct rhythm. The so-called summer cottages. Far from humble, they were designed for just a handful of months annually. Yet those seasons held immense significance. Newport was the arena for forging or shattering standings, brokering wedlock, and discreetly gauging and ordering wealth. Beyond Philadelphia, the main line emerged as yet another avenue of regal estates. Rail travel rendered daily commutes feasible. Affluent clans established rural retreats, conveniently close to city headquarters. Acreage cost less than in Manhattan. The atmosphere was purer, the lots more generous. Here, they blended both worlds, the vitality of metropolitan commerce and the spectacle of countryside splendor. The grandeur continued to grow, because the era permitted it. Federal income taxes remained absent. Workforce was plentiful and inexpensive. Supplies could be sourced globally. Craving a specific French limestone, it got transported. To bring in skilled craftsmen for ornate plaster ceilings with gold leaf, you'd summon them from Italy and set them up right on the property for months, sometimes years. What emerged was a realm where grand aspirations manifested in built form. Residences that proclaimed through granite, bronze, and crystal how their inhabitants had triumphed in fields like rail transport, iron production, finance, or commerce. Regardless of the fortune's origins, the mansion stood as tangible evidence. Still, amid the glittering fixtures and string ensembles performing dances in grand stone salons, the underpinnings of this era proved more fragile than they seemed. The riches were genuine. The influence was undeniable. Yet they rested on financial norms and societal norms destined to unravel. The very environment that birthed these grand estates was already subtly transforming under their bases. Chapter 3. The Gold Coast and Millionaires' Row, domains of opulence. These lavish abodes didn't dot the nation haphazardly. Instead, they gathered in targeted areas where closeness to fellow elites held value and visibility in elite spots amplified status. Manhattan's Fifth Avenue served as the prime showcase. The segment from 51st to 96th Streets earned the nickname Millionaires' Row. Residences of the Vanderbilts, Ayers, and Carnegies flanked the boulevard, forming a tangible catalog of the nation's prosperity. Every exterior vied for notice. Every doorway broadcast the clan's sophistication, drive, and means. At 51st Street, the Vanderbilt Triple Palace claimed a full city block. It featured 3 adjoining structures, one for William Henry Vanderbilt and one apiece for his daughters, rendered in French Renaissance aesthetics, with soaring vaults and public-accessible galleries on select occasions. The intent shone through. This dynasty possessed not only riches, but also a stake in high society. A short distance uptown, the Astor residence dominated yet another key intersection. Beyond that lay scores more. Certain clans opted for light-hued stone. Some favored rich crimson masonry. A handful embraced complete chateau designs, complete with spires and sculpted masonry evocative of the Loire Valley. Rivalry persisted unabated. One clan engaged John Lafarge for custom-stained glass panels. Another tapped Stanford White for their gala salon. A further one shipped over intact timber-lined chambers from British estates and reassembled them meticulously in the city. Yet Fifth Avenue imposed constraints. Parcels cost a fortune, plots squeezed tight. Vertical expansion worked, but lateral sprawl didn't. You couldn't fashion the expansive landscapes of authentic old-world domains. Landscaped areas shrank to mere patches. Seclusion felt scant. Adjacent dwellers lurked just beyond the partition. The North Shore of Long Island provided the answer. Dubbed the Gold Coast, it delivered vastness. Clans acquired hundreds of acres. They erected dwellings atop elevations with panoramas across Long Island Sound. They fashioned enclosed realms. Entrances barred intruders. Extended entrances built drama into every visit. Elaborate landscapes crafted by European-schooled designers unfurled like theatrical backdrops to the skyline. These estates dwarfed even their city siblings. 50, 80, or 100 chambers. Plenty of room, endless funds, and perpetual one-upmanship. F. Scott Fitzgerald would immortalize it in The Great Gatsby. The imagined West Egg and East Egg drew from actual terrain, actual villas, actual soirees, drawing crowds via automobiles and yachts with bands performing till sunrise. The book underplayed the extravagance, if anything. Harbor Hill, Clarence Mackay's creation, commanded about 650 acres. The manor itself spanned space rivaling multiple urban blocks, ornamental grounds fanned out in all directions, conservatories, equestrian facilities, an operational creamery, and quarters for help that outshone typical dwellings. In 1927, upon Charles Lindbergh's return from crossing the Atlantic, the celebration unfolded at Harbor Hill. That's the stature in play. A venue for national icons where press buzz materialized in authentic spaces. Newport, Rhode Island, played by a variant set of guidelines but the identical principle. The quote one qualified as seasonal retreats. Clans descended for the warmer months, June to September. Yet the structures themselves shunned understatement. The breakers, Cornelius Vanderbilt II's commission, boasted some 70 chambers. Marble House, its grand portal, aimed to awe. Vaults reaching 50 feet. Pillars hauled from Italy. Gold accents blanketing nearly every inch. Guests entered humbled, awestruck, and keenly sensible of entering an alternate realm. Rosecliff, Marble House, the Elms. Every estate bore a distinct flair, yet all fulfilled the essential role: exhibition, hospitality, and command of the social sphere. The gatherings achieved mythic status. Masquerade fetes hosting throngs of attendees. Meals featuring elaborate multi-course menus, each dish matched to a specific wine. European orchestras imported for just one evening's performance. Elaborate setups that demanded weeks of preparation, only to be taken down by dawn. A certain hostess once released thousands of live butterflies into her ballroom. Another transformed an interior room into a lush garden complete with actual trees and a functional fountain. Such opulence wasn't just accepted, it was the norm. Returning to the mainland, the Philadelphia Main Line area cultivated its own tradition of grand residences. Prominent clans like the Stosburys, Wideners, and Cassatts erected sprawling country homes, close enough for easy city commutes. The Pennsylvania Railroad facilitated this lifestyle seamlessly. One could reside in a 100-room estate and arrive at the office in less than 60 minutes. These properties offered all the advantages missing from urban dwellings: ample space, seclusion, and fresher air. At the same time, they provided what remote countryside retreats couldn't: nearness to fellow affluent households, along with straightforward connections to city life, governance, and commerce. The layout of affluence was meticulously planned. Different regions fulfilled distinct roles. Manhattan emphasized prominence and social prestige. Long Island focused on monumental splendor. Newport handled seasonal socializing and orchestrated spectacles. The Philadelphia Main Line delivered constant luxury on a pastoral expanse, yet location by itself couldn't sustain these estates. Brick and stone formed merely the exterior framework. Their survival hinged on a steady, unbroken stream of capital, something more delicate than architecture, and tougher to sustain than manicured grounds. Chapter 4. Case 1. Harbor, the house above the clouds. Harbor Hill wasn't merely enormous. It represented a calculated declaration, etched in enduring materials. Clarence Mackay selected the location deliberately, the tallest elevation along Long Island's North Shore. About 650 acres of undulating terrain with unobstructed vistas across Long Island Sound. On certain foggy mornings, with mist pooling in the lower areas, the residents appeared to hover over the cloud line. That illusion was crucial to Mackay. His father had amassed the wealth through telegraph networks, oceanic cables, and the unseen networks binding global lands. Clarence took over the fortune along with the burdens it imposed. He needed to demonstrate his rightful place among the elite, showing he wasn't simply coasting on inherited success. Harbor Hill became his bold response. Work started in 1899. The designer was Stanford White, the architect elite families summoned for creations that echoed through generations. He crafted the Washington Square Arch, the original Madison Square Garden, and countless homes for the nation's wealthiest. For Mackay, White fashioned a residence drawing from French chateau aesthetics, but amplified to a uniquely expansive American style. The structure extended to approximately 120 rooms, though the precise number varied by inclusion criteria. Did it encompass storage areas, staff accommodations, or the underground wine vault capable of storing thousands of bottles? The arrival path unfolded like a theatrical reveal. Guests passed through portals reminiscent of old-world domains. The drive curved uphill amid sculpted surroundings. Vegetation was positioned to highlight chosen panoramas while concealing the rest. Motorists spent a few minutes climbing. Upon arriving at the front door, the intention was clear. This was a place of significance. The foyer established the atmosphere immediately. Soaring 2 stories with a majestic stairway dividing into dual curving branches. Intricate stone carvings that occupied artisans for months. Sourcing spanned the globe. Italian marble, English timber linings, bespoke lighting from Manhattan artisans. The reception areas were engineered for gatherings beyond ordinary imagination. The dance hall accommodated hundreds. The formal eating space fit 50 at ease, or more with extra seating. Several lounges existed, each evoking a distinct ambiance. A study lined with bookcases reaching skyward. An auditory chamber calibrated by experts, allowing a full ensemble to resonate without overwhelming the ears. Out of sight, the operational backbone was extensive and discreet. Cooking facilities scaled for 200 diners, storage larders, chilled chambers, dormitories for scores of employees, a dedicated boiler house for warmth, and on-site power plants since municipal electricity proved too inconsistent for such grandeur. Beyond the walls, the grounds extended the spectacle. Structured landscapes cascaded down slopes in terraced levels, with reflecting waters and jets of water softening the rigid stone expanses. European-sourced statues accented the scenery. A series of glass houses cultivated rare flora through all seasons, defying Long Island's harsh colds. Mackay employed Harbor Hill precisely as envisioned. He hosted corporate allies, lawmakers, overseas nobility, and international officials. The estate functioned as his introduction, affirming his standing alongside established U.S. lineages. The pinnacle of Harbor Hill's glory arrived in 1927, when Charles Lindbergh returned triumphant from his groundbreaking solo transatlantic flight. New York City sought a fitting venue for his hero's welcome, and the grand formal event unfolded right there at the estate. Crowds numbering in the thousands gathered, with Lindbergh himself positioned on the expansive terrace, gazing across the very panorama that had inspired Mackay to construct the mansion in that spot. Images captured that evening depict the residence at its zenith, packed with revelers, aglow with lights and deeply embedded in the fabric of the nation's lore. Yet subtle cracks were already emerging. Mackay's wealth, though vast, had limits. Maintaining the property proved far costlier than anticipated, with expenses for servants' salaries, fuel to warm the sprawling interiors, endless upkeep, and mounting property taxes piling up relentlessly. Year after year, the upkeep demanded a six-figure sum, regardless of whether the halls echoed with visitors or stood silent. His personal life unraveled too. His spouse departed the estate, leaving behind a structure crafted for lavish gatherings that now rang empty as he wandered its passages alone. He fought to sustain it, unable to envision surrendering the symbol that defined his stature in society. Still, the financial strain wore him relentlessly. Following Mackay's passing in 1938, his heirs confronted an agonizing dilemma: cling to the house and let it devour the remnants of their inheritance, or abandon it and preserve what they could. They chose retreat. The mansion lingered vacant for years. Amid World War II, authorities eyed the site for potential military use, but ultimately rejected it, deeming even the government's resources insufficient for such burdensome care, a telling judgment in itself. Finally, in 1947, wrecking teams descended. What had required ages to envision and erect vanished in mere months. Explosives toppled the core edifice, while demolition spheres pulverized the remnants. Rubble from the stonework served as landfill. Select ornamental elements were rescued and auctioned off. A fountain relocated to a distant state's public garden. Fragments of sculpted masonry reappearing in unrelated structures. The once majestic home fragmented into oblivion. Its grounds were subdivided and marketed. Where formal terraces and manicured gardens had graced the landscape, modest suburban dwellings now sprouted. Compact parcels housing everyday families in the unassuming communities the estate had been meant to eclipse. In the present day, scant traces endure, perhaps a handful of stone pillars at the entrance, a fragment of boundary wall. Drivers passing through the neighborhood remain oblivious to the grandeur that once dominated the scene, unaware of Lindbergh's gala, the opulent soirees, or the vista that led Clarence Mackay to believe he had erected a celestial retreat. Long Island's loftiest summit persists, but the regal edifice that once surmounted it has faded into memory. Chapter 5. Case 2. White Marsh Hall, crafting an American Versailles. Unlike Harbor Hill, which faded into obscurity with barely a whisper, White Marsh Hall's demise roared with drama. Edward Stosbury amassed his riches later in life, tying the knot with Eva Cromwell in 1912 when he was well into his 60s. She, by contrast, was vivacious and driven, harboring a sharp vision for their union's opulence. Her dream extended beyond a mere mansion or expansive property. It was to be a true palace, a beacon proclaiming their ascent to the pinnacle of U.S. elite society, a domain so imposing that it would compel rival tycoons to elevate their own ambitions. Salisbury possessed the resources to realize it. As a key figure at J.P. Morgan and Company, one of America's mightiest financial institutions, his wealth soared into the tens of millions. In 1916, such capital could reshape the world, manifesting virtually any blueprint imaginable. They selected a site in White Marsh Valley beyond Philadelphia's limits: gentle slopes, excellent soil flow, crisp atmosphere, proximate to urban duties yet secluded for autonomy. About 300 acres awaited transformation. Their chosen designer, Horace Trumbauer, had previously crafted estates for the Wideners, the Elkinses, and fellow Philadelphia powerhouses, emulating Old World splendor on New World proportions. For White Marsh Hall, he drew from French and English inspirations, but surpassed them in scale and audacity. The residence boasted 147 rooms, though the exact tally varied by how one categorized ancillary areas. The figure alone fueled its legendary status, outstripping the White House in chambers and rivaling upscale hotels in cubic footage. Building dragged on for years. Specialized stone was extracted and shaped exclusively for the endeavor. Master artisans imported from Europe tackled the intricate details. The interiors gleamed with ornate plasterwork, custom frescoed vaults, Italian marble, and premium English timber linings. No detail escaped premeditation. Little relied on commonplace materials. The foyer soared across several stories, anchored by a majestic stairway that branched into sweeping flights upward. Visitors climbing it could peer downward to the intricate floor mosaics and upward to the artistic dome overhead. This orchestration served a singular purpose: to astonish. The reception areas amplified that impact. The grand ballroom accommodated hundreds in splendor. The dining area could easily accommodate 40 diners, featuring concealed passages for the household staff integrated into the wooden walls, allowing them to enter and exit discreetly without disrupting ongoing discussions. A secluded cinema offered formal rows of seats, alongside an exhibition space for artworks, a book collection where precious volumes were showcased akin to gallery pieces, and several reception areas, each outfitted in a distinct, meticulously selected aesthetic. The operational zones were equally expansive, though kept hidden from view. Massive cooking facilities on an industrial scale, specialized chambers for storing fine dishware, cutlery, and glassware, extensive wine cellars, living spaces for the extensive workforce essential to operate such an estate, laundering operations capable of handling endless supplies of bedding and attire, and a central heating system that resembled a miniature industrial plant more than a residential feature. Outside, this deliberate grandeur extended seamlessly. The landscapes were designed by leading experts in the field. Elaborate geometric beds in the style of French gardens, serene reflecting ponds, sculpted fountains depicting ancient motifs, tiered platforms descending in precise gradients. A series of conservatories to cultivate blooms and rare flora throughout the seasons, horse barns and shelters for the expanding array of motor vehicles. The overall expense aligned with such ambition. Figures vary, yet the building costs alone probably exceeded $3 million in 1916 dollars. Today's value would surpass $80 million easily, and that covered merely the basic framework. Outfitting the interior demanded yet another substantial outlay: paintings, furnishings, woven hangings, ornamental items, all selected for a singular aim: to captivate an audience that was notoriously difficult to astonish. Eva Salisbury secured her grand residence, and, for a period, she employed it precisely as envisioned. Gatherings at White Marsh Hall evolved into tales whispered throughout the region. Ensembles performed in the grand hall as crowds of attendees glided across the polished surface. Multi-course meals were crafted by culinary masters hailing from Europe. the sweeping entranceway filled with cars as the city's upper echelons pulled up in formal attire. Within, the personnel navigated the hidden paths like a well-organized force, ensuring the spectacle appeared seamless. For a short era, the arrangement functioned flawlessly. The Stasburys occupied the heart of Philadelphia's social scene. Their estate turned into the coveted venue for every desirable event. The immense proportions, the opulence, the relentless refinement in every element, it all fulfilled its objective. Yet even amid the pinnacle of splendor, the financial demands were relentless. The property demanded a full-time crew of scores: gardeners, domestic aides, kitchen staff, drivers, guards, each requiring compensation, each necessitating accommodations, meals, outfits, and oversight. The fuel costs for warmth were staggering on their own. With 147 chambers, numerous boasting lofty vaults, in an area prone to harsh cold spells, the quantity of coal to sustain White Marsh Hall's comfort was tallied in weekly tons rather than monthly sacks. Land levies rose as authorities tallied the estate's assessed worth on their ledgers. Upkeep was perpetual. An edifice of that magnitude inevitably developed issues in various spots. Tiles to mend, pipes to fix, wiring to modernize with advancing innovations, exterior masonry eroding, interior timber expanding and contracting. Each issue arrived paired with a hefty fee. The Stasburys could manage it, though their resources, while vast, were not boundless. Edward was growing elderly. He had been middle-aged when the endeavor began. Now he was truly frail. Thus, a shadow lingered over White Marsh Hall, even as musicians filled the air and crystal fixtures cast glows upon the stone floors. What occurs when the funds begin to dwindle? The response emerged far quicker than those present anticipated. Chapter 6. The reckoning arrives. Obligations, repairs, assessments, and shifting eras. Edward Stasbury passed away in 1938. Ava remained with White Marsh Hall and assets that proved far less abundant than presumed. The Great Depression had struck in the slim interval between the mansion's zenith and Stasbury's passing. Not even the wealthiest clans emerged unscathed. Holdings plummeted. Payouts that once flowed as reliably as the tides abruptly ceased. The financial sector, which had elevated Stasbury, trembled to its core. Eva endeavored to sustain the operation. She reduced the workforce. She sealed off disused sections. She scaled back social affairs to essentials. Yet there were boundaries to economizing in a regal domain. The calculations were unforgiving. A 147-room abode required fueling regardless of whether it hosted revelers or stood vacant and shadowed. The furnaces paid no heed to festivities or solitary mourning. They consumed fuel voraciously. Attendants were needed to load it. Mechanics had to tend the machinery and controls. Those individuals anticipated wages. Levies on the property were based on evaluators' judgments of the terrain and construction's value. White Marsh Hall occupied about 300 acres of elite territory, crowned by a palatial edifice. The yearly duty amounted to tens of thousands of dollars year after year. Irrespective of any revenue the site generated, preservation persisted. Ceilings started to drip. Cracks formed in the facade's stonework, worn down by time. Corrosion plagued the outdated pipes. Initial wiring setups demanded modernization. These issues couldn't be trusted to just any repairman. Amateur hands weren't allowed near ornate plasterwork, bespoke wooden interiors, or fine imported stone. Experts skilled in restoring such elements demanded premium fees. Beyond a threshold, operational expenses refused to shrink further. Guards were essential to deter burglars and mischief makers. Groundskeepers had to maintain the estate and essential utilities. Basic cleaning staff prevented the place from falling into damp decay and ruin. Even a bare-bones team for a property this grand required at least 12 employees on the books. Eva crunched the figures. White Marsh Hall was devouring the last of her wealth. Without alterations, the estate would drive her to financial ruin in just a handful of years. She wasn't the only one facing this dilemma. Across the nation, clans that had erected lavish Gilded Age estates confronted identical ledgers. The economic landscape had shifted dramatically. The 1913 income tax debuted at low levels. Gradually, rates escalated. By the Revenue Act of 1935, the highest bracket soared to 79%. Maintaining the post-tax earnings needed for a grand residence now demanded far greater pre-tax income simply to break even. Estate taxes emerged as a steep new levy. Upon the death of the family head, successors frequently liquidated holdings right away to settle debts with the state. Properties like White Marsh Hall appeared valuable in ledgers, yet they drained funds rather than generating them. Heirs faced a harsh dilemma. Offload revenue-generating holdings to sustain a dazzling but costly void, or relinquish the manor and retain the enterprises and investments, the truly covered expenses. Workforce expenses were evolving too. Household help, once content with extended shifts for basic pay, discovered superior prospects. The Great Depression had hit hard. Yet as revival took hold, fresh opportunities arose: manufacturing roles, shop clerk jobs, clerical duties, positions that spared workers from residing on-site and remaining available around the clock. Meanwhile, societal views on opulence transformed. The ostentatious splendor typified by White Marsh Hall began to seem tasteless, even embarrassing. Hardship lines and closed plants dominated headlines during the downturn. Parading riches amid national want seemed increasingly discordant. Even elites leaned toward discretion and subdued elegance. A handful of proprietors experimented with fresh revenue streams. They leased their homes for gatherings, nuptials, fundraisers, business banquets, whatever could help balance the ledger. Certain estates in prime spots with sizes not too overwhelming endured as hospitality sites this way. Some pursued philanthropy instead. They gifted their domains to schools, medical centers, faith-based groups. Theoretically, it benefited everyone. The donors escaped a liability. The organizations acquired a majestic asset. In practice, however, fiscal experts often uncovered the catch: a bequest that might impoverish the receiver. Funding utilities, heating, and structural integrity exceeded what most entities could sustain. The outcome proved bizarre. Structures built for millions fetched no takers regardless of cost. The problem wasn't lack of appeal, it was the sheer expense of upkeep. Eva Stosbury resisted the tide longer than most. She attempted residing at White Marsh Hall with skeleton staffing. She pursued leases. She sought purchasers willing to shoulder the estate and its obligations. All efforts collapsed. By 1943, she departed permanently. The property shuttered. Belongings draped in dust cloths. Shutters sealed the panes. Employees let go, save for a lone watchman to patrol the land and inspect the structure sporadically. White Marsh Hall lingered vacant through the seasons. Expenses didn't disappear. Levies persisted. Fundamental care and protection still extracted funds. Yet it housed no one. No soirees, no visitors arriving along the sweeping entrance, just an enormous edifice of rock starting its subtle breakdown. Comparable decisions gripped other lineages. Harbor Hill, raised in 1947. Scores of Fifth Avenue residences toppled, giving way to high-rises yielding reliable rents rather than consuming them. In Newport, multiple summer homes loomed unoccupied, unsellable, even ungiftable. The era of U.S. grandeur palaces concluded not in grand galas or dignified adieus, but in a stark fiscal reality that refused to balance. Chapter 7, Case 3. The Mark Hopkins Mansion and the fire that took everything. Not every palace fell to slow economics. Some met faster, more violent ends. The Mark Hopkins mansion sat on Nob Hill in San Francisco, the city's high throne. From there, you could look out over the bay and the downtown streets below. Residing at that Nob Hill location signaled you'd ascended to the pinnacle of West Coast high society. Mark Hopkins amassed his wealth through railroads, standing as one of the influential Big Four who drove the Central Pacific forward, the vital western segment of the transcontinental line that connected California to the nation and enriched a select few beyond measure. His residence embodied that burgeoning rail fortune, extending broadly over the summit in several tiers of intricate Victorian design, complete with spires, projecting bays, and intricately sculpted timber. Within, the spaces brimmed with lavish elements, exotic woods, overseas fittings, and artwork sourced from Europe and Asia alike. Construction tallied over $2 million in 1870s dollars, positioning it among America's priciest personal dwellings back then. Hopkins passed away in 1878, yet his spouse held on to the property. For years, it endured as a steadfast feature of the horizon, a prominent fixture seen from vast swaths of the city, constantly evoking the extravagance rail riches afforded. That sense of enduring solidity shattered on the morning of April 18, 1906. The quake struck at 5:12 a.m., registering 7.9 on the scale. The earth trembled for almost a full minute. Structures fractured and tumbled throughout San Francisco. Remarkably, the Hopkins estate, firmly secured to the solid rock of Nob Hill, withstood the initial assault. The building endured intact, suffering substantial harm but not total ruin. Soon after, however, blazes erupted. Gas mains burst open, power cables ignited, scores of independent fires sprang up nearly simultaneously. The municipal water supply lay in ruins from the tremor, pipes fractured, pressure depleted. Firefighters mobilized swiftly, but turning on the hydrants yielded scarcely a trickle. The infernos swelled and combined, consuming street after street. Gusts drove the blaze upward, toward Nob Hill. By midday, thick plumes of smoke loomed on the horizon from the Hopkins vantage. By nightfall, the conflagration advanced steadily up the inclines. Halting it proved impossible under the circumstances. No water reserves, no advanced tools to ascend the elevation quickly. The outbreaks were overwhelming in number, scale, and speed. The Hopkins mansion smoldered through the darkness. Its timber-filled interiors succumbed initially. Floors, walls, stairs, furnishings, anything flammable. The intense blaze eventually fractured masonry and bent steel. Come sunrise, only a hollow frame remained. Portions of the outer stonework lingered upright, yet the ceiling had caved, panes gaped as dark voids, and the core reduced to cinders and mangled remnants. 3 days on, once the blazes subsided at last, Nob Hill resembled a war zone. The Hopkins abode, along with the neighboring Crocker residence, the Flood Mansion, and the Stanford House, all the elite dwellings of San Francisco's elite, gathered at the urban summit, had perished in this shared calamity. The tangible destruction hit hard. Chambers, packed with heirlooms narrating a lineage's tale, paintings, volumes, pieces of furniture, correspondence, images, decades of gathered legacy, erased in one stroke. Yet the profounder toll was emblematic. These estates symbolized security and dominance, the notion that rooting one's riches in durable rock and metal ensured longevity across eras. The tremor and ensuing flames debunked that vision harshly. The forces of nature disregard social rank. To the laws of science, a grand home is merely another edifice, prone to ignition like any other. Certain Nob Hill clans opted for reconstruction. The Flood Place, for instance, was restored. Others cashed in on payouts, offloaded their parcels, and moved elsewhere. The area's elite landscape evolved. The Hopkins parcel transformed into something unforeseen. By 1926, the Mark Hopkins Hotel debuted on the spot, refined and thriving, though far from a secluded domain. Instead, it functions as commercial property, a venture crafted for profit and sustainability. Such transitions weren't isolated. As years passed, the cycle recurred. When opulent estates ignited, the underlying terrain often proved too prime for another solitary family retreat. Hotels yielded better returns, as did high-rises and hybrid complexes. The district evolved from exclusive havens for one household to communal opulence accommodating multitudes of visitors or dwellers. Formally, the San Francisco blaze stemmed from a seismic event, a force of nature. Nobody intentionally targeted the Hopkins mansion for demolition, yet the result mirrored the work of a hired wrecking team. The edifice vanished. The lifestyle it represented couldn't just be resurrected unchanged. In subsequent years, additional mansions faced parallel fates. Sudden flares erupted in vacant properties. Probes pointed to defective circuits, transient fires, or thunderbolts. A few incidents clearly accidental. Others lingered with unresolved doubts. Flames excelled at total erasure in ways mechanical takedowns seldom did. Demolitions with teams and gear allowed recovery of elements, entryways, surrounds, sculpted blocks, lamps, items of market worth. But fire devoured it all, rendering the residue all but valueless. Burned timbers, fractured rocks, sagging iron, mere debris, destined for loaders and removal. When insurance was current, payouts could prove remarkably substantial. At times, the insurer's compensation exceeded what the owner might have realized through a standard sale. Occasionally, flames resolved financial woes that eluded every other remedy. The Mark Hopkins residence went up in smoke after an earthquake ravaged the city. Yet its tale exposed a deeper truth. These opulent estates, crafted and promoted as enduring symbols, proved far more vulnerable than their proprietors ever conceded. A single evening's blaze could reduce 100 years of permanence to cinders. Chapter 8. Excess in residence, deficit in pretense. The blaze atop Nob Hill dazzled, yet the demise of most such palaces unfolded more subtly, more gradually. These endings stretched not over one fateful night but across decades as the succeeding heirs simply turned their backs. This cycle echoed nationwide. A prosperous founder invested fortunes in a lavish dwelling. He occupied it for years on end. He hosted gatherings, conducted deals, and flaunted the estate, just as envisioned. Then came his passing. His offspring confronted a harsh dilemma. Do we truly desire this? Frequently, the response was negative. Explanations differed, but the result remained constant. The younger set pursued alternate ambitions, vocations, and visions of affluence in daily existence. Certain ones raised within those walls harbored silent grudges, overly stiff, endless protocols dictating family spaces versus visitor areas, constant demands to exhibit polished etiquette amid their personal sanctuary. Their youth had transpired in a structure meant to awe outsiders, and now, grown, they craved a genuine abode, not a theatrical backdrop. Many had dispersed already. Weddings led to relocations across states or shores, forging fresh existences afar. The ancestral home became merely a holiday stopover. They felt no pull to return and shoulder the ongoing burden of overseeing a decaying fortress, regardless of the nominal funds inherited for its upkeep. The obligation felt like an unwelcome yoke on their routines. A few beneficiaries, schooled abroad, opted to remain overseas. To them, U.S. estates seemed ostentatious, excessive, and oddly defensive. Freshly minted, desperately seeking validation for true majesty. Europe offered genuine fortresses with battlements, remnants of antiquity, and ages of legacy embedded in the masonry. Why devote one's prime to preserving what resembled a facsimile along the main line or on Long Island? Even among those sentimentally inclined, the logistical hurdles loomed vast. Operating such domains demanded specialized acumen that few possessed. One had to identify roofers capable of mending a slate expanse rivaling a playing field, artisans skilled in restoring ornate ceilings undetected, vendors stocking the exact fuels, fabrics, and provisions the design anticipated, strategies for directing a household staff numbering 2 or 3 dozen sans disorder, arrangements for banquets or balls accommodating throngs without descending into disarray. That mastery typically perished with the founder. He had devoted lifetimes to mastering his domain as a precision engine. His progeny observed peripherally but grasped few intricacies. Upon succession, they inherited oversight of a colossal apparatus that appeared seamless, externally yet defied control internally. The psychological toll weighed profoundly too. Above all, these abodes embodied their forebears' aspirations, not the heirs. Residing there equaled inhabiting another's blueprint, donning it perpetually. Certain successors sensed confinement in their legacy. On ledgers, the property tallied millions. In practice, it defied sale. Who would acquire such an anomaly? And should a buyer emerge, the seller bore the stain of dismantling familial heritage. That remorse gnawed deeply. At Whitemarsh Hall, these forces simmered languidly. Eva Stosbury closed the estate in 1943. She passed in 1946. The grounds devolved to successors utterly detached. They had never resided there, never orchestrated events beneath its vaults, never cherished its panorama. They spurned the property and even had affection stirred. Sustaining it lay beyond their means. Thus the manor lingered vacant, season after season. Expenses accrued unchecked, while chambers stayed unoccupied. No lights glowed in the casements, no carriages ascended the winding approach, only a colossal edifice of rock gradually yielding to erosion and elements. Panes shattered, moisture infiltrated, damp marks snaked along surfaces. Ceilings shed chunks of stucco in hushed, creeping cascades. The dormant furnace faltered. Conduits iced and ruptured each cold spell, drenching unseen spaces for weeks. With each cycle, fresh scars emerged. The structure expired incrementally. The kin attempted sales, no takers, they pursued gifts. Educational institutions reviewed the maintenance expenses and backed out. Medical facilities followed suit. Faith-based organizations offered courteous refusals. Even public entities, which occasionally acquired vast holdings for administrative buildings, health centers, or educational facilities, turned them down once they examined the ongoing costs. At that stage, the residents had entered an odd realm of worthlessness. Officially, it appeared grand. In practice, assuming control involved shouldering enormous expenses and complications. The logical option was to abandon it and anticipate the emergence of an unlikely purchaser down the line. Comparable situations unfolded nationwide. Along Fifth Avenue, grand homes remained unlit for entire periods, awaiting teardown since no successor desired occupancy in a 60-room urban dwelling in Manhattan. In Newport, summer retreats shut down after a single season and stayed sealed because the following generation showed no interest in upholding seasonal customs. Along the main line, expansive properties got divided into modest segments as the offspring favored practical suburban residences, equipped with reasonable lawns and affordable utilities. A handful of lineages discovered an alternative route. While their dwellings were still structurally sound and restorable, they handed them over to conservation organizations. The sites transformed into exhibits. The kin relinquished control, yet established another kind of enduring heritage. The structure endured. Docents conducted visits. Signage and pamphlets recounted the history. Descendants generations removed could return and witness the origins of the familial legend. Such a resolution demanded vision and collaboration. The majority of households lacked that level of planning. They clung on until a rupture occurred. A fiscal emergency, a massive restoration expense, an abrupt revenue decline. When they finally moved to resolve it, the edifice had typically deteriorated beyond economical repair. The personal dimensions of these choices seldom surfaced in print media. What the public encountered was a brief announcement. Historic estate slated for razing. Concealed within that neutral phrase lurked at least one relative who had agonized for months over remorse, financial ledgers, and the dread of failing ancestors long departed. The spouse, methodically sealing off chambers and releasing staff incrementally. The successor, isolated in an enormous dance hall, struggling to envision repopulating it. The attorney at the formal table, methodically detailing how the levy exceeded the property's liquid assets. These individuals weren't theatrical antagonists, delighting in the ruin of splendid architecture. They were everyday folks navigating legacies that had morphed into burdens. Thus, progressively, they pursued the sole viable course under their circumstances. They released their hold. Chapter 9. The developers arrive, palaces versus parking lots. Once households released their grip, other parties intervened. Typically, builders, individuals who perceived potential amid what others viewed as nuisances. The years following the war reshaped the terrain. The 1950s ushered in an unprecedented surge of residential expansion in the outskirts. Emerging households sought detached dwellings over rentals, avoiding communal corridors and lifts. Standalone abodes featuring gardens, parking areas, outdoor grills, and play equipment. The need was immense. The aging compounds occupied precisely the spots where this fresh appetite peaked. They claimed territory ideal for burgeoning suburbs, proximate to urban centers yet beyond the congested heart, with solid infrastructure, accessible commuter rails, and settled adjacent communities. And atop that terrain lay extensive tracts, subdividable into scores of construction-ready plots. The calculations were stark and straightforward. Acquire a forsaken manor plus 50 acres at a sliver of its original construction price. Raise the building, level the ground, install roadways and services, partition into 50 parcels. Market the plots directly, or erect residences on them and vend those. The earnings prospects surpassed any vision the first proprietors entertained. Within that formula, the manor held zero worth. It represented merely a hurdle to clear, a barrier separating the builder from the genuine commodity. Like lines of saleable dwellings. Harbor Hill succumbed to this rationale in 1947. The teardown spanned months. The site had been constructed for longevity. Robust masonry barriers, metal supports, premium substances from base to summit. It resisted fiercely, yet explosives and demolition equipment disregard superior workmanship. In time, they pulverized the edifice to debris. The approximately 650 acres re-emerged as a residential development. Levitt and Sons, the company that led in factory-like home production, secured the property. They constructed numerous dwellings, modest, budget-friendly, uniform, ideal for ex-servicemen leveraging the GI Bill, launching households, pursuing a measure of security. The disparity bordered on the absurd. In the space where one clan once traversed about 120 chambers, scores of clans now resided in snug three-bedroom bungalows. Vast opulence transmuted into everyday prosperity. The environs equalized. Whitemarsh Hall traced a parallel trajectory, though more gradually. The residence remained vacant across the 1940s and well into the 1950s. Unsupervised, acts of destruction began to take hold. Neighborhood youth sneaked past cracked panes. Spray paint appeared on surfaces that once entertained the city's upper crust. Metal conduits were stripped away. Hardware vanished without a trace. Whatever could be carried off and resold simply did. Town authorities became uneasy. The site was evolving into a safety risk, an attractor for burglaries, outdoor blazes, and general mischief. Trespassers started camping inside. Minor blazes ignited sporadically. Concerns over coverage and legal exposure piled up. In 1980, local government concluded the mess had gone on long enough. Wrecking approvals came through. That blast, which kicked off our tale, marked the end of a long, gradual downfall. A mansion that had demanded fortunes and ages to construct crumbled in moments. Heavy machinery rolled onto the grounds, debris hauled off in haulers, the patios and landscapes leveled by earth movers. Now the spot holds a serene neighborhood. Split levels and traditional colonials featuring built-in garages, modest yards, roadside letterboxes, and hoops mounted above driveways. Everyday suburban existence. A handful of locals recall some grand edifice once occupied the land. The majority remain unaware of White Marsh Hall's legacy. Along Fifth Avenue, the opulent residences faced this fate sooner. Space in Manhattan grew too precious to squander on solitary dwellings, regardless of their splendor. The Vanderbilt Triple Palace fell in the 1920s. Commercial structures took its spot, evolving into a skyscraper for business. The Astor residence came next, followed by scores of others. What replaced them prioritized utility without remorse. High rises packed with residents for multiple households rather than one sprawling clan. Skyscrapers yielding reliable leases. Lodgings brimming with transient visitors. Edifices aligned with urban commerce's demands. Advocates for safeguarding heritage resisted. They contended these dwellings transcended mere luxuries for the affluent. Such structures embodied design, legacy, and societal relics. Destroyed, their essence proved impossible to fully restore. The original creators had passed. Craftsmen skilled in sculpting rock, molding ornamentation, forging crystal panes. Those talents had faded or turned costly beyond reach. Occasionally, such pleas took effect promptly. Several residences got spared just in the nick of time, designated as protected sites under emerging safeguards. Yet, the bulk of these strongholds vanished prior to such regulations or widespread sentiment to contest their loss. From the property developer's perspective, they weren't antagonists. They addressed real issues. Folks required places to live. The aging domain stood vacant, crumbling, burdensome for proprietors and neighborhoods. Transforming unused acreage into viable assets seemed straightforward. At times, deeper principles played a role. The years after the war promoted equality. These bastions evoked a bygone period of overt opulence that jarred with the narrative of equal opportunity America sought to project. Raising an estate to erect lines of modest dwellings could symbolize advancement. Society largely concurred. Harbor Hill's removal sparked no widespread rallies, no linked arms encircling the base. Designers and area chroniclers voiced sorrow. Long-time dwellers reminisced about the structure and sighed. Yet the wider populace endorsed the swap. The grandeur harked to a closed chapter. That chapter had ended. By the 1960s, the trend stood clear. The majestic domains were fading, not abruptly, but persistently, piece by piece. Each teardown smoothed the path for the subsequent. In their stead emerged communities bearing titles that tipped a hat to history while wiping it away. Manor estates, chateau gardens, millionaires' row apartments. The contradiction stared one in the face. Roadways bore the lineages of clans whose abodes had been cleared to form them. Promotional pamphlets touted timeless allure. But the constructions that forged such allure had vanished. And in nearly every instance, unless you knew precisely where to search, The earth revealed no evidence they had ever existed. Chapter 10. Ruins, Teenagers, and the Haunted House. Prior to the arrival of builders, an interim phase unfolded. The stretch following a residence's abandonment, yet preceding any resolution of its destiny. That suspension might endure for weeks, seasons, or even generations. In those spans, the properties answered to nobody yet everybody simultaneously. Whitemarsh Hall during the 1960s and 1970s resembled wreckage. The rooftop seeped from numerous spots. Downpours cascaded via ripped overheads onto polished stone surfaces. Dampness seeped into edges. Fungus bloomed in verdant and dark splotches. Ornamental coating on higher stories turned spongy and plummeted in sizable fragments. The majestic stairway, crafted to awe arriving notables, became treacherous from damp, lichen, and avian waste. A path, meant for stately climbs, devolved into a perilous incline. Panes fractured. Certain from weather and wear, others from hurled stones and idle sabotage. With transparency removed, nature invaded. Fowl staked claims. Doves roosted amid the dance hall beams. Nocturnal raptors seized the upper stories. The mansion echoed with the clamor of wildlife, cooing birds, frantic wing flaps in the shadows, and the scrape of talons over floors that had once gleamed with polish. Yet the decay never fully cleared out human visitors. Neighborhood teens stumbled upon Whitemarsh Hall, just as young people inevitably find forgotten spots. An elder sibling might have tipped them off. A bold climb over the perimeter on a challenge. Rumors rippled through local schools. Soon enough, it turned into a go-to hangout. Most arrivals happened under cover of night. They wriggled past shattered panes or warped entrances. Beams from flashlights and flickers from lighters pierced the vast alien interiors. The sheer size left them awestruck. Chambers that appeared endless, flights of steps twisting into more steps, corridors that dragged on without relief. It bore no resemblance to their suburban split levels or compact brick townhomes. Nothing from their everyday routines. They scribbled on the surfaces, initials, years, pointers, rough sketches, professions of affection, and jabs at no one in particular. Generations of tags piled over ornate stucco that had commanded lavish sums. Aerosol streaks marred the stonework. Ink doodles defaced intricately sculpted timber. Every fresh group of youths added their mark of presence atop the previous ones. Plenty showed up to booze. The wreckage provided seclusion from watchful adults, prying eyes, and the law. Vacant chambers transformed into impromptu gathering spots. Discarded cans accumulated in nooks. Shattered glass sparkled amid the grit. The lingering odor of smokes and weed blended with the musty reek of mildew and crumbling timber. A few ventured in, solely from intrigue. They craved a first-hand glimpse of opulent excess. To linger in the husks of salons where America's elite had hosted affairs. For these explorers, the estate made the past tangible. You could feel it, traverse it, attempt to envision the rugs, the fixtures, the melodies that had vanished. Gradually, the site gathered its own lore. Whispers proliferated. Folks claimed sightings of silhouettes in upstairs casements, echoes of steps or murmurs in deserted passages, abrupt chills in certain chambers. One tale spoke of a fallen staff member. Another pinned it on a kin from the lineage. Particulars varied, but the core stayed fixed. The place was cursed with spirits. That spectral reputation held a kernel of reality. Such structures carried an unsettling vibe. Particularly after sunset. Immense chambers swallowed in blackness, odd creaks from the shifting frame, flapping panels, gusts whistling past fractured glazing, creature calls rebounding oddly. The sensation of navigating a domain crafted for vitality, now resonant only with remnants. The spectral yarns served a purpose beyond chills. They amplified the allure. An ordinary derelict manor intrigued. A possessed citadel captivated. The narratives allowed youths to indulge fear, to shriek, to prod one another further into the gloom. It elevated covert entry to an escapade beyond mere intrusion. Grown-ups and town watchdogs viewed it through a sharper lens. To them it screamed peril. Timbers sagging from moisture rot, steps with wobbly risers and collapsed balustrades, overheads poised to collapse unannounced. Adolescents scrambling blindly weren't defying phantoms. They courted grave harm, or fatality. Mishaps occurred. A youth plummeted through a frail level into the space beneath. Another gashed deep on splintered shards. Minor blazes ignited from overturned flames or indoor refuse pyres. Every episode ramped up demands on proprietors and enforcers to intervene. Barriers rose. Warnings against entry proliferated. Law enforcement circuits increased, yet wire meshes yielded to climbers. Placards went unheeded, and no force boasted the manpower to guard each vacant property round the clock. The cycle repeated at Harbor Hill, prior to its razing. Youths slipping inside. Revels amid the debris. Destruction and shattered fittings. Phantom yarns swapped in class the next week. Identical scenarios unfolded across scores of forsaken properties. Linwood Hall, near Philadelphia. Idle Hour on Long Island. Bannerman Castle, along the Hudson. Each drew crowds magnetized by wreckage. Aspiring snappers, city adventurers, adrenaline hunters, and restless juveniles seeking thrills beyond the strip mall lot. There's a raw potency in observing affluence crumble. It upends assumptions. These dwellings were erected to embody endurance, to demonstrate their builders transcended mundane foes like erosion, elements, and entropy. Traversing them in collapse, unveiled that boast crumbling before your eyes. Riches had faltered. Nature's pull and downpours had triumphed. For adolescents from humble abodes, such jaunts offered an unscripted lesson. They grasped, beyond any textbook drone, that endurance is no surety, that wealth dissolves, that the bold flourishes of one era morph into the perils and oddities of the following. In an odd sense, these remnants proved more accessible than the opulent estates ever were. The public could wander in freely. No need for RSVPs, no liveried staff to scrutinize arrivals, no invisible barriers of etiquette, merely a break in the fencing or a breach in the masonry. Yet this open era never endured. Sooner or later, boundaries shifted. A grievous accident occurred. Liability loomed large, or an investor arrived with deep pockets and blueprints. Policies toughened, wrecking permits were issued, and crews mobilized. Overnight, the well-trodden route via the forest or meadow halted at fresh obstacles, barriers bolstered, watchmen patrolled. Machinery loomed on sites where youngsters once gathered to spin tales of hauntings. The forsaken structures that had served as their concealed haven and rite of initiation faced imminent obliteration. A handful of youth snapped parting shots. Others slipped past security for a final glimpse, defying the risks. The majority lingered beyond the perimeter as borers pierced the stone, explosives rigged with fuses, alarms blared, blasts reverberated, facades crumbled. The dilapidated spaces that had doubled as their private retreat and initial brush with transients tumbled into debris. Chapter 11. What's left behind? Portals, cascades, and hollow husks. Once the haze cleared and the wreckage cleared out, vestiges lingered, scant yet sufficient to intrigue passers-by years on. Cruise through select outskirts of Philadelphia nowadays, and you could spot twin stone pillars flanking a mundane neighborhood lane. Towering slabs nearly 8 feet high with intricate engravings enduring, despite ages of exposure. They now enclose little of note, just pavement and curb markings. Vehicles glide through unheeding. Drivers seldom glance up. These pillars once heralded the approach to White Marsh Hall. They persisted for about 70 years post-demolition of the manor. The landowner who acquired the property opted to retain them, perhaps for aesthetic flair or because removal expenses outweighed any gain. For whatever motive, they endured. Nearby, in a modest community green space, a marble basin in timeless design sits, its contours softened by time, yet the pattern remains distinct. A brass plate notes its origins from a bygone property. Few who pause there grasp that the original site lay under a mile distant. The basin was rescued amid the teardown and relocated, a solitary artifact from White Marsh Hall, functioning amid unfamiliar surroundings. Comparable relics dot landscapes where lavish domains formerly reigned. On Long Island, elements of Harbor Hill dispersed nationwide. A balustrade segment graces a botanical exhibit in Virginia. Ornate masonry embeds a Connecticut archive. A serene water feature bubbles in a New Jersey greensward. This scattering stemmed not from deliberate conservation, but from opportunistic recovery. As wreckers dismantled the residences, select features fetched prices. Salvage merchants snapped them up. Affluent enthusiasts shelled out sums. Museums welcomed gifts of portions. The palaces were disassembled and auctioned piecemeal, akin to a high-end vehicle broken down for reusable components in a junkyard. Certain survivors remained near their roots. Within the housing tract supplanting Harbor Hill, mid-century builds from the 1950s and 1960s, woven masonry from the erstwhile pile, and sculpted architrave crowns a carport, retaining borders fashioned from base stones. Risers to a simple portal once ascended to regal thresholds. Present inhabitants typically remain oblivious. They purchased long after the builds. The rock is merely durable, attractive material, unremarkable. But occasionally, curiosity stirs. A resident spots the exquisite chisel work on a boundary fence. Out of place for routine suburban fare. They delve into regional annals. They learn their lot occupies former Harbor Hill acreage, and the blocks in their entryway were shaped by artisans brought from Italy in 1899. Such revelation reshapes their view of the dwelling. The modest abode gains a veiled depth. They're residing amid echoes of grandeur, traversing inclines trod by affluent clans positioned where sweeping verandas or strollways once extended. Certain survivals stand fuller. In Newport, multiple Gilded Age villas persist, repurposed as exhibits in timely fashion. The Breakers' marble house, the Elms. Now they welcome sightseers. Patrons buy tickets, move in clusters, and gaze at chambers once reserved for exclusive soirees and select company. These safeguarded abodes function as sealed archives. They vividly depict what vanished in other spots. The vastness, the artistry, the meticulous focus on each vaulted ceiling, latch, and railing. Strolling the Breakers' marble hall renders the vanishing of White Marsh Hall or Harbor Hill more tangible. It dawns that the era didn't merely forfeit a grand edifice. Such irreplaceable human creativity and skill vanished along with them. That said, the surviving estates have changed dramatically from their original glory. Today they operate mainly as exhibition spaces. Cordon barriers restrict access to select areas. Subtle air conditioning systems run in the background. Guides wearing badges deliver rehearsed narratives. The vibrant everyday rhythms that once filled these places have disappeared. Nobody calls them home anymore. No daily habits unfold within. No servants ignite the overhead lights in preparation for an evening gathering. Only tourists, snapping photos, attempt to envision the absent elements. Those estates that endured owed their fate to timely intervention, frequently A relative recognized the looming economic troubles and transferred ownership to a conservation organization. In other instances, a community heritage group hurriedly gathered funds to buy the property just ahead of a real estate deal. Such salvations demanded resources, precise timing, and coordination. Fail to act in that narrow opportunity, and demolition teams would show up. Without sufficient backing, even noble efforts crumbled. For each residence preserved, at least 5 others met destruction. Ruins in various states offer a different form of legacy. Take Linwood Hall, located near Philadelphia. It lingered vacant for years, yet preserved much of its form. Portions of the roof caved in. Moisture ruined the inner spaces. Still, the core framework endured. Situated within walking range of the former site of Whitemarsh Hall, it provided a window into a possible different path. An image of what Whitemarsh could have become without the heavy machinery's arrival. Linwood captivated a specific breed of enthusiast. Camera enthusiasts captured its gradual decay. Scholars sifted through records to piece together its history. Advocates debated fiercely over the feasibility and merit of restoration. The edifice posed a tough dilemma. Where does the pursuit of conservation veer into delusion? When has a building deteriorated beyond salvage? At what juncture does the cost of reviving a single opulent relic exceed what a community ought to invest in one symbol of affluence? Linwood lingered for years in limbo. Too ruined for practical purposes. Too significant to raise without resistance, too costly to rehabilitate fully. Nevertheless, as long as it persisted, it maintained a link to an entire period. While upright, it allowed passers-by to pause, gesture, and remark. Quote 2, Chapter 12. Case 4. Linwood Hall. The estate that defied oblivion. Linwood Hall's endurance was anything but assured. Over many years, it seemed like a structure existing on temporary reprieve. Perennially on the verge of the end from a harsh season, a fresh proprietor, or a municipal decision. The peril loomed persistently, like an unending dark sky refusing to unleash its rain. Construction began in 1897 for Peter A.B. Widner, a powerhouse in streetcar operations. He controlled transportation networks, public services, the sorts of essential services that generated steady profits as folks commuted daily. When he undertook Linwood Hall, Widner stood as one of America's wealthiest individuals. The designer was once more Horace Trumbaugh, the architect who subsequently planned Whitemarsh Hall. For Widner, the scale escalated further. Linwood featured about 110 chambers in a neoclassical design. It boasted an extended, balanced frontage, with pillars and dimensions selected to convey power and endurance. The aesthetic screamed timeless presence. The location lay in Elkins Park, beyond Philadelphia's edge, in the affluent mainline area. Near enough to the city for commerce and sophistication, yet distant enough for expansive meadows, shaded avenues, and the expansive gardens suited to a residence of that magnitude. Within, Widner crafted not just shelter, but a showcase for treasures, surpassing even the building itself, his artwork. Far from a hobbyist, he amassed with intensity. Canvases from Rembrandt, Vermeer, Raphael, plus statues and antique pieces. Linwood served equally as a personal gallery and dwelling. Walls lined with displays, intentional illumination setups with early considerations for stable warmth and moisture levels well before such systems became standard. The Widner lineage crossed paths with one of the era's most notorious disasters. In 1912, Peter Widner's son George and grandson Harry set sail on the Titanic, and both perished in the sinking. That devastation crushed the household. A domain erected for triumphs and festivities, morphed into a site burdened by sorrow. Peter Widner passed away in 1915. His renowned private trove of art, deemed among the elite collections, didn't remain in Elkins Park. It found its way to the National Gallery in Washington. The masterpieces that once adorned Linwood's secluded exhibit rooms shifted to fuel the shared heritage rather than a single clan setting. The property remained with relatives, yet it never reclaimed its prior function. Too vast, too burdensome, too entwined with those painful recollections. Moreover, the Widner wealth, though vast, confronted the familiar strains afflicting other Gilded Age inheritances: escalating levies, shifting economies, the unraveling viability of grand domiciles. By the 1940s, Linwood Hall had shut down, the kin relocated. Upholstery lay draped in dust cloths. The chandeliers grew dim. Shutters covered the windows. The familiar decline had started. Yet Linwood Hall didn't proceed to the typical conclusion. In 1952, a religious institution acquired the estate. It became a seminary. Sleeping quarters transformed into student dorms. Reception areas shifted to classrooms and administrative spaces. Worship services took place in the majestic hall. The adaptation prioritized function over finesse, yet it ensured the structure stayed heated, in use, and cared for. That period endured through the 1990s. Eventually, the faith-based organization departed. Linwood Hall found itself vacant anew. This instance lacked any evident path forward. Roof leaks permitted moisture to seep inside. The deterioration pattern from White Marsh Hall started emerging once more. Rainfall seeped through. Mold spread across surfaces. Plaster softened and fell. Floors twisted and sagged. Chambers that formerly housed multi-million-dollar artworks now echoed the look of derelict storage facilities. Community advocates for heritage began raising concerns. Linwood Hall wasn't merely a grand residence. It represented a key creation by Trumbauer, among the finest intact relics of a Gilded Age estate. If any structure merited preservation, this one did. Still, the pressing issues proved harsh. Preserve it? For what purpose? Who would undertake the effort? How to finance it? The property remained in private hands. Acquisition demanded substantial funds. Repairs would run into tens of millions. No straightforward function could recoup such investment. Its design complicated division into residential units. The vast area rendered it costly for office or hospitality conversion. Existing museums already strained under upkeep expenses. Few clamored to adopt yet another massive edifice requiring endless funding. Thus, the mansion lingered season after season. Rot accelerated. Thieves pilfered copper roofing. Intruders shattered panes and entered, bypassing security measures and warnings. Each fresh breach, each pilfered element, each winter's freeze and thaw escalated the price and diminished the odds of revival. Photographers infiltrated and captured the scenes. Pictures of Linwood Hall's inside circulated digitally. Faded wall coverings in formerly pristine areas. Moisture marks advancing over intricate ceiling details. Birds nesting on veranda edges. The dance floor buckled, marked and discolored. These visuals struck deeply. They illustrated the vulnerability of opulence, all the lavish substances, all the masterful artistry. Nothing shielded against basic abandonment. Gravity drew the water. Fungus claimed any moist spot. Timber expanded, fractured, and decayed. Masonry split in fine lines over winters, expanding in springs. Each chilly period sparked the same worries for those tracking the saga. Might this winter cause a large roof portion to fail? Could this year push the edifice beyond redemption? Nevertheless, Linwood Hall persisted. Just scarcely, yet it endured. The exterior facade remained. The decorative elements persisted. The core framework largely held firm. Even as surface details eroded, the framework resisted surrender. In 2012, an entrepreneur purchased the site. He openly declared his intent to revive Linwood Hall. Following countless disappointments and whispers across the years, doubt was understandable. Many had voiced desires to rescue the place. Few achieved beyond temporary fixes, like sealing a gap or securing a pane. But this occasion marked real progress. Initial efforts lacked allure. They focused on shoring up stability. Urgent fixes to halt the downturn, patching roof areas, tackling water entry, enhancing runoff systems, bolstering guards to deter most intruders. Only then came gradual renewal, avoiding a magical overhaul of all areas. Such a full return would span decades and demand unattainable means. Rather, selective interventions safeguarded vital sections, sealed the building against weather, curbed the worst decay, pulled the structure from ruin's brink without abruptly resetting to 1900. Community volunteers entered the narrative. Regional heritage societies arranged labor sessions. Individuals passionate about design and the past contributed time, supplies, or funds. Restricted visits welcomed visitors to build support and gather resources. Each admission funded additional shingles, stonework, or urgent fixes. Efforts continue today. Linwood Hall hasn't achieved a tidy, triumphant close. Damage lingers. It demands prolonged work and vast sums. Yet it no longer fades in silence. It resisted the fate of Whitemarsh Hall and Harbor Hill, vanishing without trace. It avoided becoming just another cleared parcel with a wistful label. Through that defiance, it evolved into something fresh, tangible evidence that such edifices need not disappear when sufficient dedication deems them worthy of the challenge. Chapter 13. Why Some Mansions Endured. Linwood Hall's tale stood out precisely because endurance was rare. The majority of these grand estates met their end, with only a select few enduring. Exploring the reasons behind this reveals the key differences between those doomed to the wrecking ball and the ones that gained renewed purpose. Proximity to accessible areas played a huge role. Properties within reasonable travel distance for sightseers stood a far greater chance of sticking around. Take the Biltmore estate in North Carolina. It persisted in large part due to its position by Asheville, a town sizable enough to host travelers yet modest so that such an opulent property didn't seem outlandish or misplaced. Visitors could easily arrive by car, with existing lodging and dining options, plus solid road and rail connections that made trips feasible. Hearst Castle in California reaped benefits from comparable advantages. A striking seaside location, an enchanting route, not too far from Los Angeles and San Francisco, to attract visitors, but isolated enough to stand out as a true getaway rather than mere roadside architecture. The state's temperate weather aided preservation as well, sparing it the harsh freeze-thaw cycles that plagued many in the Northeast's severe winters. The Newport estates held on partly because they formed a collective. One isolated mansion might have been dismissed without much fuss. But clustered together, they established a unified historical zone. Tourists weren't drawn to a solitary structure. They flocked to experience an entire array of Gilded Age summer homes. Each property boosted the significance of its neighbors, bolstering the financial rationale for upkeep. The moment of transformation was pivotal. Estates converted to museums during the 1940s or 1950s had edges that subsequent attempts lacked. Workforce rates were more affordable, refurbishment expenses were modest, and skilled artisans familiar with old methods were still available. Delaying to the 1970s or 1980s meant expenses ballooning several times over for identical tasks. The Breakers transitioned to a museum in 1948, with the Preservation Society of Newport County, assuming control and swiftly welcoming the public. The structure remained solid at that point. The family intervened prior to mounting economic strains, prompting rash choices. This prompt action shielded it from the gradual decline that ensnared countless others. Compare that to heirs who held on stubbornly, banking on a housing market rebound, a prosperous purchaser, or some improbable fix. When they finally recognized that safeguarding was the sole viable option, deterioration had set in, roofs deteriorating, infrastructure failing, and revival had escalated from tough to virtually unattainable. Consensus among relatives proved another game-changer. Infighting over inheritances wreaked havoc on the properties. Courtroom disputes stalled progress. As attorneys debated, the residences stood vacant. Upkeep halted, leaks unchecked, plumbing ruptured. When legal wrangles concluded, the harm was frequently extensive and occasionally permanent. Early unified decisions to gift estates for safeguarding typically yielded positive results. Relinquishing title preserved their heritage, and tax regulations sweetened the deal. Contributing a landmark property could yield generous write-offs, often preferable to offloading at a deficit or footing endless maintenance bills as the building decayed. Community backing filled gaps where family funds fell short. In towns valuing their built legacy, residents mobilized. Area preservation groups ran events to raise money. Local advocates lobbied authorities. Community drives sparked press attention and incremental contributions that mounted up. The Vanderbilt Mansion in Hyde Park, New York, earned National Historic Site status. In 1940, the U.S. government assumed stewardship, covered ongoing care, and made it accessible to all. Comparable narratives unfolded at additional properties. Public entities intervened when individual owners buckled, reshaping lavish homes into communal treasures instead of personal liabilities. Yet official intervention hinged on advocacy. Champions had to convince politicians and the public that allocating taxpayer funds to bygone tycoons' abodes was justified. That pitch faced steep odds. Education demanded investment. Infrastructure required fixes. Why divert public coffers to opulent retreats of the elite? The successful counter was rooted in shared history. Proponents argued these weren't mere playthings of the wealthy. They embodied peak American design, building skills, and ornamental expertise, tangible archives of a distinct period in commerce and society. Their destruction would wipe out vital traces of past national ways of life and construction. Repurposing through adaptation rescued yet another group of estates unfit for standalone exhibits. Transforming majestic residences into lodgings, event venues, or public facilities preserved facades and structures. Inside spaces frequently underwent major alterations. Formal halls morphed into entry areas. Sleeping quarters became accommodations or workspaces, though outer forms endured and the essential silhouettes persisted. A number of Newport properties evolved into exclusive clubs. Membership fees funded fixes and daily operations. The buildings remained in use, warm, tidy. Repairs occurred routinely. The approach of turning properties into clubs generated ongoing income that most museums found hard to replicate. In other cases, educational institutions repurposed aging estates. Private academies required housing for students, teaching areas, and offices. A grand home could be adapted to serve each purpose. Such transformations were seldom kind to the originals. Historic features got covered in fresh coats of paint. Dividing barriers were erected. Athletic facilities supplanted manicured grounds. Yet the core edifice endured on the site, rather than vanishing altogether. In every instance of endurance, the surviving residences possessed key characteristics. They benefited from champions, people, or organizations determined to defend them. They secured funding, be it from one affluent patron, an endowment, government support, or reliable earnings from a repurposed function. They caught the right moment, gaining safeguards before deterioration advanced too deeply, and they relied on fortune. Fortune ensured no blaze ignited at an inopportune hour. It prevented a harsh season from caving in the ceiling. It allowed a conservation effort to succeed just ahead of a builder's proposal. It tipped a municipal decision in the desired direction. Biltmore, Hearst Castle, The Breakers, Marble House, Vanderbilt Mansion. These weren't always the most exquisite or refined creations of the Gilded Age. They were simply the ones where circumstances converged effectively. Position, opportunity, support, resources, and serendipity. For each property that achieved this balance, equally remarkable ones stumbled at the last hurdle. Defenders arriving moments too late. Drives for funds that came up short. Court decisions that favored the opposition. Weather events striking a season prematurely. The enduring ones hold immense value in part due to their scarcity. They represent a slim fraction of the opulent homes that once dotted the land. They highlight what the nation almost obliterated completely, and they emphasize one last truth. Safeguarding history isn't inevitable. It doesn't occur merely because a structure is aesthetically striking, aged, or deemed significant in records. It only unfolds when individuals choose at a pivotal juncture to invest the labor and expense. Absent that choice and commitment, even the most majestic residence meets the fate of rubble, landfill, and scattered snapshots. Chapter 14. The Preservers, Historians, Enthusiasts, and Kids with Cameras. Beyond their placement, moment, and good fortune, the mansions that persisted shared another vital element. They had individuals who wouldn't allow them to fade away unnoticed. These weren't exclusively scholars or renowned designers. Frequently, they were everyday zealots. Locals who had watched a specific residence define the skyline since childhood and couldn't envision the view altered. Hobbyists with cameras, captivated by the blend of splendor and decay. Young explorers who had trespassed into derelict sites and yearned to share their discoveries widely. The effort to conserve certain Gilded Age estates began modestly and suffered frequent defeats during the 1920s and 1930s. The majority of the public viewed outdated structures as burdens, not treasures. The nation felt youthful and fixated on advancement. Antiquity equaled obsolescence. The go-to fix was straightforward: demolish and replace with contemporary designs. Yet a handful resisted this mindset. They established community heritage groups. They began documenting structures marked for teardown. They amassed images, charted layouts, researched lineages, and archived design schematics. They assembled collections that seemed like mere keepsakes then, but proved invaluable over time. Their endeavors were typically unappreciated and disheartening. They might campaign to rescue a residence only to witness its fall. They lacked the capital to compete with constructors or the influence to reform fiscal policies. Still, they accomplished what was feasible. They chronicled prior to ruin. They toured each chamber armed with a lens and pad. They noted measurements. They illustrated intricacies. They preserved how sunlight danced on balustrades doomed to disappear soon. Those accounts evolved into portals for future audiences. When curiosity arose about vanished grandeur, these dossiers offered the foundation. The visuals exposed artistry that routine building practices had abandoned. The blueprints disclosed engineering feats that current experts had overlooked. The personal tales connected these edifices to broader tales of commerce, migration, and society. By the 1960s, perspectives started evolving. Initiatives for city revitalization had raised countless heritage districts, prompting questions about whether forward momentum demanded wiping out history. In 1966, the National Historic Preservation Act was enacted. For the first time, it established a federal system for shielding noteworthy sites, flawed and partial, yet a foundation. Abruptly, local advocacy gained enforceable power. Groups could propose sites for formal recognition. They could challenge teardowns not merely through appeals, but via classifications, reviews, and court actions. Successes remained uncommon. But now battles had terrain, rather than predetermined defeat. A fresh wave of advocates arose. A fresh wave of younger folks began appreciating the Victorian and Gilded Age designs that their elders had often labeled as overly elaborate or unattractive. They embraced the decorative flair, celebrating the elaborate wrought iron, sculpted stone details and mosaic flooring. They appreciated the bold statement in structures that captured drive, vanity, and extravagance. Before Quote 3 became a buzzword, some of these enthusiasts ventured into forsaken estates, breaking no small law in the process, and captured their discoveries. Their snapshots spread through niche publications, presentations at local gatherings, and packages exchanged among like-minded fans. Those visuals packed a punch, flaking gilt on overhead moldings, crumbling stucco, exposing lathe and support timbers. Majestic stairways ending in midair, where decayed levels had vanished. Elegance and decay captured side by side. Such pictures stirred emotions for residences people hadn't even realized were out there in their prime. Then the web exploded onto the scene, transforming everything in a flash. Suddenly, anyone armed with a simple camera or an early digital snapshot device could prowl a crumbling manor on a weekend afternoon and share the adventure globally by the next day. Sites focused on deserted sites sprang up. Discussion boards allowed swapping of locations, which properties endured, which were barricaded, which had vanished. Videos came next. YouTube evolved still shots into dynamic walkthroughs. Adventurers recorded their paths through hushed grand halls and back-of-house passages. Audiences sensed the resonance of steps, caught the groan of hinges, watched particles dance in sun rays piercing shattered panes. The immense size of these homes shifted from mere stats to a tangible sensation via the display. Certain producers zeroed in on Gilded Age estates specifically. They delved into records, unearthed vintage images, and wove them into their clips. Afterward, they'd navigate the remnants, aligning shots precisely. Look at this space over 100 years on. They elevated Harbor Hill, Whitemarsh Hall, and Linwood Hall from forgotten trivia to recognizable landmarks for vast crowds. Social platforms amplified the momentum. Instagram profiles spotlighting overlooked designs built large audiences. Brief TikTok clips on deserted manors exploded in popularity. A 10-second aerial view of a sagging rooftop, spliced with an archival picture, overlaid with notes on the wealth behind it. Each upload connected with folks who'd skip a textbook but devour a half-minute reel. The profile of those advocating for preservation evolved. It extended beyond seasoned community members and dedicated scholars battling for the sites. Youth in their teens and 20s chimed in. They viewed the grand homes as visual gems, narrative sparks, media fodder, and vital historical artifacts, surpassing the value of their foundations. One bored teen from the Philadelphia suburbs stumbled upon a clip about America's vanished palace of mirrors one evening and learned of Whitemarsh Hall. He tumbled down the online wormhole, uncovered period images, and grasped that the grounds were right near his home turf. For years he'd cycled by the old gateway unaware. He produced his own footage, filming the surviving pillars, the landscaped area with its rescued water feature, the roadways honoring Stosbury, and chatting with longtime locals who recalled the teardown. Posting it online drew tens of thousands of hits. Remarks poured from viewers nationwide, echoing the surprise. "I never knew about this place. If only it hadn't been lost." Such visibility counted. It built a following. And followings are tough for officials and builders to overlook. When yet another estate faced the bulldozer, these digital groups could rally swiftly. They circulated appeals, messaged authorities, flooded reactions under articles. Success wasn't guaranteed. They seldom halted destruction single-handedly, but they dragged the proceedings into public view. Demolition teams couldn't wipe out 100 years of legacy without a murmur anymore. These modern advocates went beyond sharing and venting. A few provided practical support. Groups of helpers tidied debris from overlooked lots, noted building flaws, compiled thorough image records, For pros like designers and experts, folks with expertise in rehab woodworking, stability analysis, preservation techniques, who volunteered hours. Others simply arrived equipped with work gloves, waste sacks, and determination. At Linwood Hall, such efforts tackled the gritty, costly tasks that strained tight repair funds. Carting rubble, trimming overgrown plants, piercing masonry, clearing interiors for pros to evaluate harm. No spotlight moments, no shareable highlights, yet crucial. Through it all, the movement grew more inclusive. It escaped the confines of specialists and affluent backers organizing galas. Now it included young shutterbugs, locals with recollections, and remote fans who'd never visited Pennsylvania but stayed hooked after tracking the saga digitally for seasons. It proved impossible to rescue it all. The majority of those grand estates had vanished decades earlier, well before any preservation networks took shape. Yet memory could still be safeguarded, and in those rare moments when finances, circumstances, and influence aligned perfectly, even the physical bricks and beams might endure. Chapter 15. Lessons from Vanished Palaces on Wealth and Significance. Beyond merely archiving the past, the footage, the dedicated helpers, the faded images and records, they prompted a tougher inquiry. What truly endures? The tycoons who erected these opulent homes believed they were securing immortality. Edward Stosbury shelled out around $3 million for White Marsh Hall, never anticipating it would last just 60 years or so. He envisioned eras unfolding, waves of Stosburys traversing its corridors. His legacy, fused to an enduring, prominent, and unmissable edifice. Clarence Mackay positioned Harbor Hill at Long Island's loftiest elevation, intentionally. He aimed to loom over all rivals, both in stature and status. The panorama extended endlessly. On bright days, Connecticut shimmered across the water. The intent was crystal clear. I reign supreme. Still, elevation offered no shield for the structure. Riches failed to ensure longevity. Paradoxically, the priciest dwellings on the priciest plots tended to disappear quickest. Upkeep proved prohibitively costly. The sprawling grounds held too much potential for profitable redevelopment to remain bound to one estate, and heirs frequently rejected the weight of inheritance outright. The stark truth emerges. Funds can raise barriers, but they can't compel successors to value them. So, what persisted? The amassed artworks. Peter Widener's canvases now grace the National Gallery, viewed by millions of guests. His residence may have crumbled, but his Rembrandt and Vermeer endure, displayed accessibly for every museum patron. This imparts a distinct moral, unlike the estate's tale. Gifts shared freely often surpass hoarded treasures in survival. Certain legacies thrived by morphing into public entities. Carnegie funneled funds into community libraries. Rockefeller backed higher education and health innovations. Vanderbilt's imprint lingers via Vanderbilt University. These titans crafted entities, frequently institutional over structural, that societies saw fit to sustain, as they served broader needs beyond ego. The palaces contrasted sharply. Designed to cater to their financiers' kin, they lost purpose when those lines faded, scattered, or grew indifferent. As tributes to solitary triumphs, they inspired little communal duty to uphold them. That's why Mount Vernon and Monticello received meticulous care, while White Marsh Hall did not. Washington and Jefferson transcended mere affluence. They anchored the nation's core narrative, their abodes intertwined with collective heritage. Edward Stosbury, for all his fortune, remained merely a financier, his property tied solely to his private saga. Once that narrative lost relevance to his lineage, it faded from wider concern. This insight undermines many notions of enduring fame. Elites invest effort and capital in ventures meant to eclipse their lifetimes. Estates, enterprises, charities etched with their titles in the entrance. The premise is straightforward. If you construct something vast and sturdy, eternity follows, carrying your renown indefinitely. Yet, immortality proves fragile, hinging on sustained funding, persistent engagement, and a collective conviction in its merit. A residence endures only with roofs mended, spaces warmed, and mechanisms restored at ongoing expense. An inheritance perseveres through prudent stewardship over time. A reputation clings if linked to pursuits still deemed vital. The Gilded Age estates flunked these criteria. Dazzling and exquisite, testaments to artistry and innovation, they remained dispensable. When they shifted from boons to burdens, when preservation outstripped willingness to fund, they dissolved. The bitterest realization. Few truly mourned their absence. Daily existence proceeded unbroken. The housing developments replacing former dance floors proved adequate. Serene neighborhoods, solid education, everyday stability. Residents in spots once graced by sweeping stairways sense no vital void in their routines. To them, none exists. Those estates addressed narrow inquiries from particular individuals in a particular era. As priorities evolved, so did the need for those responses. What lingered in regret wasn't another elite domain, but the exquisite workmanship that perished alongside them. The expertise required to construct such grand residences nearly vanished entirely. Decades later, when experts in preservation set out to refurbish the few that endured, they found it extraordinarily difficult and costly to locate craftsmen capable of replicating the initial craftsmanship. That expertise simply hadn't been handed down through the generations. This erosion extends well beyond the realm of building design. It signifies the decline of entire traditions in craftsmanship. Despite its excesses and social divides, the Gilded Age gave rise to items meant to endure for hundreds of years. Think fine furnishings, ornate hardware, sculpted rock, and intricate metalwork. Today's counterparts are more affordable and straightforward to swap out, yet they lack the intent to persist across eras. There's a striking contradiction in this. The elite erected fortresses meant to defy time itself. Yet those fortresses crumbled, even though the methods and substances used could have held up for ages. The surviving elements linger in splendid isolation. A fountain gracing a public green, gateposts lining a quiet residential lane, or a chunk of etched stone embedded in a yard enclosure, all remarkably intact after a century. The structures themselves disappeared, not due to decaying foundations, but because society as a whole deemed them unworthy of the upkeep. The deeper insight stretches far beyond bricks and mortar. Ultimately, the substance of your creation pales in importance to the motivation behind it. When driven solely by self-interest, to flaunt riches, secure prestige, or feed vanity, your handiwork will likely endure no longer than your own sway, perhaps a bit further if heirs feel compelled to uphold the facade. But should the aim reach outward, benefiting a wider group, fostering understanding, or yielding shared aesthetic wonders, then your legacy stands a genuine shot at transcendence. No promises, merely possibility. These estates impart that wisdom, chiefly via their voids, the barren parcels where they once rose, the orderly avenues and tidy yards that supplanted them, the obscure family names in archived stories of lost domiciles. Impermanence defines everything. Wealth evaporates, edifices tumble, legacies blur. What persists is solely what communities actively elect to cherish and sustain. And those selections reveal true priorities more eloquently than any opulent dwelling ever might. Chapter 16. Closing scenes, strolling amid remnants. Nowadays, the grounds of White Marsh Hall appear utterly mundane. Suburban lanes lined with homes clad in vinyl, parking areas featuring hoops for pickup games, patches of grass overdue for trimming. It's the sort of unremarkable vista common to countless U.S. neighborhoods developed from the mid-1900s onward. No overt clues on the surface evoke the site's storied past. Absent are memorials or explanatory markers. The sturdy stone pillars that once marked the gateway endured for generations, yet they've since been cleared away during road expansions, the final outward remnant sacrificed for smoother commutes. Still, the base layers endure below the surface, concealed under turf, pavement, and porch supports. Those limestone slabs, which once bore the weight of 147 chambers, remain embedded in the earth, hidden, unacknowledged, yet undeniably there. Launch a drone overhead, and subtle contours reveal themselves. The roadways twist in patterns that deviate from typical grid layouts. They mirror forgotten estate borders, trace the path of the former carriageway. Contemporary development overlays the antique footprint like fresh ink on a barely visible draft. The terrain clings to echoes of bygone splendor, even sans conspicuous survivors. This phenomenon repeats nationwide. At spots where lavish properties once dominated, the earth retains its recollections. Lot lines still outline obliterated barriers. Avenues arc to avoid absent landmarks. Century-old plantings tower above bungalows and mid-century homes erected 7 decades hence. In spots like Long Island, Harbor Hill's outline persists if you learn the landscape's language. The hill's distinctive profile, roads that meander to accommodate it, or an outsized, strategically positioned tree that defies post-war planting norms. Such hints are understated, readily dismissed. Locals rarely notice. They commute, tend their yards, handle chores, oblivious to the buried bases propping up their routines. The past layers quietly beneath the present, woven into the soil, poised for the inquisitive mind to unearth it. More often, that spark is figurative rather than a literal excavation, though actual digs occur too. A resident excavating for an outdoor terrace or lower-level addition strikes unyielding rock in an unexpected spot. They expose a stretch of masonry, a set of submerged stairs, or an ancient base. Bewildered, they puzzle over why such quality stone would be interred. Frequently, full clarity eludes them. Yet with growing frequency, seekers pursue resolution. They investigate their properties via historical records. They consult vintage charts and overhead images. They learn their unassuming abode occupies the site of a former dance hall or an elegant slope once blooming with cultivated plots. People uncover images of a grand estate that once dominated that very spot of land. Such a revelation reshapes their perspective on their current residence. The modest dwelling remains unaltered, yet the narrative enveloping it transforms entirely. No longer merely a suburban dwelling, it emerges as a link in an extended chronology tied to vast wealth, lavish gatherings, financial collapses, and eventual raisings. This insight ripples through the community from one resident to the next. An individual might recount their findings during a backyard barbecue or on social media. Another grows intrigued and investigates their own property. Before long, the whole neighborhood realizes they're navigating what was once a carriage path, that their dead-end loop occupies the site of former horse barns, and that the towering maple defining the avenue belonged to an original alley. The lost manor evolves into a collective tale of haunting, though this version is grounded in truth. Such recognition can't resurrect any structure. In tangible terms, the status quo persists. The edifices are absent, their bases still concealed beneath the soil, yet it alters the way folks interpret their surroundings. The neighborhood sheds its ordinary veneer, revealing a distinct history, overlaid with strata of opulence and decline, beneath the manicured shrubs and letterboxes. History seldom vanishes without a trace. More often, it submerges. It burrows into the earth and into collective recollection alike, yet never departs completely. It lingers in land records, peculiar road bends, ancient foliage, and concealed masonry, poised to resurface for those prepared to pause, observe more closely, and begin excavating the